Thank you for joining the To Freedom podcast. In this episode, I am welcoming Tamara Buzyna-Adams. Tamara is one of millions of Americans who are part of the sandwich generation. For years, she cared for her father as he lived with dementia while continuing to support her aging mother, all while raising two children and navigating a midlife career transition. A genealogist and first time author, Tamara's meticulous research skills led to the publication of Last Ship to Freedom. What began as the translation of her grandmother Lydia's 100-year-old diaries evolved into a remarkable journey of uncovering family history, resilience, and hope. Today, Tamara enjoys helping others explore their own family stories to better understand who they are, where they came from, and where they are going next. In this episode, we explore the remarkable true story behind Last Ship to Freedom, the extraordinary resilience of an 11-year-old girl fleeing the Russian Civil War, the immense research that brought Lydia's story back to life, and how that journey transformed Tamara herself. We also discuss how understanding our family history can deepen our sense of identity, and why looking to those who came before us can help us discover where we are going next. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so happy, Tamara, that you are here with me.
I'm so excited to be here too. I've been looking forward to this conversation with you.
Yes, so have I, because I actually read your book.
I'm always amazed. That's so awesome. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I have a long list of questions for you. When you filled out my form, one of the first impressions I had was that you were talking a lot about you, which I love.
Mhm.
And you started with you cared for your elderly father through
Yes.
dementia, and you are
Yes.
in the sandwich generation. And I mean, we can have an entire conversation about that
Right.
alone. And then keeping your mum busy during a difficult time,
Hmm.
you decided with her to start to translate your grandmother's diary that was
Yes.
in Russian.
Yes.
So the project, all in all, I think some of it started during COVID, right?
Yes. Yes. It started actually right after COVID started in March of
Right.
2020.
However, it took you 25 years of research to finally publish the book.
Yes. Well, I've been doing 25 years of research just of my general family, but
Yeah.
specifically the diaries started in 2020. So
Right.
really, I guess now 6 years of just specifically on the diaries because I didn't know anything about the diaries before. I mean, I
Right.
sort of knew she had diaries, but I didn't know about them. I didn't know what was in them.
All right. One of the questions I wrote down to ask you is, and to me, it was clear from reading your book, but I think most people tuning in today have not done that.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you, you observed your grandmother all your life as quite a stoic person, and
Yes.
then you uncovered a completely different personality through her diaries. How did your
Yes.
view of her change?
Oh, it completely changed. I didn't understand why she was so stoic. I didn't bother to wonder why she was so stoic and she was so set in her ways. Things had to be, such in such a way, if you didn't hold your fork correctly, you would get kind of reprimanded gently, but still reprimanded nonetheless. That disappointment is there. And I never really understood it. And, as a kid and as a young adult, you don't put yourself in somebody else's shoes. I mean, I think that comes with maturity, but I don't know, I didn't think about that. And so when I was reading, I knew her as an adult, And when I was reading her diaries and her thoughts and her thought processes and, everything, I was like, wow, she is just a child with full of hope and a very positive person. Like there were all
Yeah,
these terrible things going on around her. She lived on a steamship for 18 months as she was escaping, political turmoil. And yet she's talking about how excited she was just to go have a picnic on land, and it just kind of I saw her in a different light. Like, and the other observation I made was that in her diary, she kept it from 1921 to
yeah,
1924. Every single day was kind of the same format. She would put the day of the week, the day of the month, and then the year, like religiously and she kind of formatted each paragraph or whatever she wrote very similarly. And I'm like, that probably, because she was in such an unstructured and uncertain environment, that was a way for her to get that certainty and that result, or that how she's everything is going to be, she can control her environment by being more controlling her little what she could control. And
right.
so that kind of made sense to me, and I was like, oh, I wish I had given her more you know uh opportunities to open up. And
Right.
it was really an eye-opening experience. And
Well, it's
actually,
interesting because one of the things that fascinated me while reading this book was the contrast between the real life history that you
yes,
uncovered and her
yeah,
memory. Had
yeah,
some historical records describe the Kherson, the ship she was
yes,
on, as very overcrowded. I think if I remember
yes,
correctly, it had capacity of 1,200 people, but they crammed in 7,200 refugees
yes,
onto it at some
hmm,
point, crossing the
yeah,
Black Sea.
yes,
However, when you read her diaries, her um, focus was on friendship,
yes,
curiosity, joy, learning.
yes.
And, my theme is a lot about freedom and going
Mm.
from survival to freedom. What do you think she understood about surviving hardship that many of us forget?
Well, I think also, she was 11 years old, and I think when you're younger, you just have a different view of the world. And I think her parents, so I think in a sense, she was probably naive and didn't really, I mean, I think she knew what was going on, but I think I have to give credit to her parents for kind of shielding her just enough so that she could still enjoy the joys of life. I think that and really the other crew members too took such an interest in the children,
Mm.
and they really, it's like they protected them, and they really wanted them to have a positive experience, because as you know, since you read the book, there were a lot of other terrible things that happen on the ship, but she doesn't
Yes.
mention, she would mention in the diaries a little bit, like a sentence like, oh, so and so got drunk, and or that they were singing late last night and got drunk, and
Mm.
whatever, but that was like the end of it. She wasn't um, she wasn't focused on that. Like you said, she was focused more on her own personal, could that be considered selfish? She's thinking about herself, or is that her, she's trying to, just survive,
Right.
basically.
Right.
I mean, I think
Coping skills.
she's coping skills. And I think, like I said, I think her parents are credit to helping her. And I think writing the diaries was probably a really good coping mechanism for her. Whether it was
Right.
her idea or her parents' idea, I don't know. But, I kind of say that it was kind of her therapy, probably, for going
Hmm.
through what she went through. And I think that was probably a credit to how
Right.
she, lived her life later on.
For our life that we are living today, there's so many things being thrown at us, and
Yes.
a lot of fear-driven news reports and things that's going
Yeah.
on in the world. And one of my coping skills is, what can I focus on today that's positive? And to
Yeah.
me, that is a coping skill. And you were mentioning that she was a very
Yeah.
positive person.
Yes.
So I see this as definitely a
Yeah.
survival skill. So I think it's
For sure.
amazing.
I feel like I got that positivity from her. I never thought of her. I didn't think of her not as a positive person. Like I didn't think of her either way as positive or not positive. But I feel like the more I read her diaries, the more positive I realized she really was. And I feel like
Yeah.
I'm such a positive person.
That's quite amazing. And so I want to come back to you a little bit because this really impacted you and your mom and your
Yes.
family. So when you started this project translating the diaries, you were at that point caring for your elderly father who had a diagnosis of dementia.
Hmm.
And as you said, you were in the sandwich generation. So
Yes.
you found the diaries and you knew they were there, but in a very big
Right.
way. When I read this, I thought to myself, maybe the diaries found you.
Yeah. I really am a firm believer of that because, it was my mother just all of a sudden one day, we're looking for something to do for purpose. And,
Mm.
my mother and I can't sit still and just do nothing. We always have like 100 different projects going on. So, she just decided one day it was her initiative. She's like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna translate these diaries once and for all. And I kept saying, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. We discovered these diaries, and she's like, no, 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 we didn't discover them. We knew about them all this time. And I was like, well, why don't we do something with it? So it was like, in that all that time that we had, we just were all in. We were just so focused on it. And I think it gave her purpose. It gave me purpose. I just kind of, as the world was, I say as the world was shutting down, I'd sit at my computer and my world was literally opening up with all this information. It was just so, so incredible. And, made me feel good that I was uncovering our past and just looking for similarities between myself and my grandmother that I did not think were there. It was incredible.
It's when I read it, I almost had a sense of longing that
Yeah,
I wish I could understand my father better. He
right.
was a very difficult man. He passed away last
Yeah.
year. And
Sorry.
I wish I could understand why. What?
Yeah,
Because when I look at his brother, my uncle, they were two
yeah,
completely different people. Why
right,
did my father become that person? Why did my uncle not?
right,
I wish
right.
he would have left a diary, but unfortunately, he did
Yes,
not.
yes. Yes. Well, I feel like, in situations like that, you can look into the past, like, look how he grew up. How did he, what was his family dynamic? Maybe
Mm.
his father was exactly the same way as he was, and he just learned it from that behavior. Or maybe he had some sort of traumatic experience. It's so hard to know when there's nothing left to
Right.
look into. But
So I want to encourage anybody who's watching or listening to this, if you still have elderly family alive,
yeah,
talk to them, ask them these questions,
yes,
because I regret not doing that.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. And, my father just passed away as well, in April. And I feel like, I
Mm.
made such an effort to ask him questions because of this whole situation with the diaries when we didn't ask my grandmother questions when she would have known the answers because she was sharp up until her early 90s, but right
Mm.
before she died. And, we could have had so many more answers. And so I was determined that when my parents moved up close to me, that I would make a point of interviewing them and getting all the information that they knew down. So now that's my next project is to work on my mother's story
Amazing.
while she's still around. But yeah,
I
that's
love
like
that.
my number one tip. Like when people tell me that they're interested in their family history, I say, you have to talk to the oldest person in your family and get whatever stories they have because those stories will die with them.
Right.
So it's very
So did
important.
this help you understand your mother better?
Oh, yes, yes, because I'm like, oh my God, mom, you are just like her. And so it gives me a little bit more understanding of my mother. So, don't get me wrong, I still get, annoyed, but, we all do. But,
Yeah.
it's just, and, right now I'm going through letters that my grandmother at age 54 wrote to my mother while my mother spent 9 months in the Soviet Union in 1963 and
Mm.
64. I
Wow.
had mentioned that in the book. So that's
Yeah.
my next project. I'm going to do something with that. So it's really interesting reading, after knowing my grandmother, all my life, and then reading her diaries as an 11-year-old child. I got a totally different perspective.
Mm.
And now again, reading her letters from 1963 and 1964, at the
Mm.
same age that I am. And it's really eye opening. And she's writing things that my mother says now. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, I have to look at the letter. I'm like, who is writing this now? Is this my mother? Or is this my grandmother? And they have the
Right.
same handwriting too.
Interesting.
It's amazing, DNA, environment. I think it all plays, a key
Isn't it
role. and
amazing? Yeah.
and I see myself in it too. Like some of the things, I'm not as harsh, or I'm not sure what the right word is, as my grandmother and mother, but there's a lot of similarities. That attention to detail, I definitely have. Like I have to have everything, with my genealogy research. I have to have it. I need to have the exact date. Everything. It's like I like
So
to
I'm
know all the
thinking
facts.
of a story that you wrote about in the book was when your grandfather died. Your
Yes.
grandmother had showed absolutely no emotion,
Yeah.
and she was just keeping that composure the whole time.
Right.
And then you read a letter she wrote,
Yes.
and in her privacy, this is how she expressed herself. And she was talking in that letter about how she would cry and then pull
Yeah.
herself together. And I
Yeah.
thought that was so
Yeah.
eye-opening.
Yes. Yes. Because you don't know what somebody's struggling with, even though they look fine, you don't know. They could be,
Mm.
dying inside, mentally. So
Right.
it really has helped me look, from their perspective of what they went through. And,
Right.
knowing what my grandmother went through as an 11-year-old girl, it really, makes me understand her better and understand why she is the way she, or why she was the way she was.
Do you think it's generational as well? Because in her generation, they were more the silent generation. They didn't talk about their
Yes,
issues.
yes.
Where today, everybody knows everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's so true. I mean, it wasn't proper to talk about your struggles or bad things, you never wanted to talk about any of that. That was just not a good look. You wanted to look like you were put together. And nowadays, like you said, everything is out in the open. So I'd be interested to know what she would think of that now,
Exactly. Yeah.
but yeah, it was very, very closed off.
Mhm. Okay, so you wrote that before this project, you saw yourself as a wife, a
Hmm.
caregiver, a daughter, a mother, and somewhere along the way, you became a researcher, a
Yeah,
historian, and eventually an author.
yeah.
When did you first realize that this journey wasn't only about uncovering Lydia, your grandmother's
Right.
story, it was about uncovering a new direction for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, the summer before COVID, I had turned 50. COVID came. There was all this time to think about, this was before we started the project. I was like, oof, what have I done with my life? There's so many things I want to do. And, once I got this project and the purpose, I was all in. And, I had only, it was only going to be for the family. We were only going to write her story for the family. And I don't think, I think at one point I didn't even want to write a narrative. I just wanted to have the direct translations of every day. And my mom's like, no, 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 we need to do a narrative. And then towards the end of the translations, when my mother was translating the fourth volume, um, my grandmother mentions the last name of her best little friend on the ship,
Right,
right?
right.
Zhenya. Like we had no idea. Like we were like, who is this person? My mother and I would have these conversations like, oh my gosh, we want to know who this is. And I wish I had the last name. So I as soon as she would read ahead, kind of, cheating to
Right.
see what
Yeah.
was ahead, because we just couldn't wait to see what secrets she might have revealed. And so she texted me immediately when she read the name, and so I looked it up on Ancestry, and I like immediately found two trees, and I was like, I was dumbfounded. I was like, oh my gosh. And they had the same pictures we did. Like, I never dreamed that I
Wow.
would find anybody else that was on this ship. You would think with
Yes.
7,000 people on this ship that, somebody would surface somewhere. So
Right.
anyway, so I messaged this family, and they messaged me back, and we're in contact now. We've met several times, and it's been an incredible relationship. But once I became connected with the descendants, and they had their own stories about what happened on the ship, I realized it wasn't just my story. It
Right.
really needed to be told, because and not necessarily, I mean, for the people that were on the ship, but anybody that has experienced a refugee situation, having to leave their home. I've talked to several people who have Chinese background, and they had to leave. They would leave. They had their parents or grandparents had, fled China and gone to Taiwan, and then ultimately to the United States. So it's a very similar story, and they could totally relate to it. I had a professor friend of my dad's read the book, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, this is exactly what happened to my parents or my grandparents." And same situation, but different country, different
Right.
backgrounds, whatever. So I felt like maybe it could help a lot of people, no matter what the
Mhm.
background is. Just understand, if you understand your past, what your ancestors went through, it can give you some inner strength and some resilience to go on and with your own life. And if they went through this and survived, certainly I can too. you know
Right. I want to just look at my notes here because
oh
I
no,
made
you're
many
fine.
of them. You did so much due diligence because you not only wrote about your grandmother's diaries, but you also, where's the note that I made? The person that George Orlov, you
Yes,
also quote a lot of his diary entrance,
yes,
and um,
yes.
he was the one who actually said the last ship to freedom, right?
No, actually, he did not say that, but he wrote, he described them leaving the dock, that on
Yes,
November
that's
14th.
right.
He
Yes.
described it, and it was such a good description. I could picture it in my head. And it was, he explained how the ship was rocking back and forth because of so many people, and how General Wrangel, who was in charge of the evacuation, stood on the front of his boat, giving a speech. And just, I wouldn't have that if I didn't have this firsthand account. I mean, the
Right.
history books cover it, but they don't do the personal stuff. And it was incredible to find that memoir. Unfortunately, he left the ship after they left the Black Sea,
Mhm.
but that was such an important find for us, because my grandmother didn't start the diaries until like 2 months or one
Exactly.
month after after they evacuated. And
Mhm.
all we had were stories of like the horses, in the water.
Right.
And
I wanted to
I mean,
talk to you
that was
about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was a heartbreaking story. And I sort of remember my grandmother talking about that, but for
Mhm.
some reason I was like, I don't know, I was in the other room or something. I don't know, but I
Right.
wasn't ready to hear it, I guess. But it was really incredible that. But the last ship to freedom actually came from a discussion I had with Susan, who's the granddaughter of Zhenya, her
Okay.
best friend on
Okay.
the ship.
Yes.
And she had been talking to the daughter of the youngest sibling that was on the ship. And she had said something about, it really was their last ship to freedom, like literally, like
Yes.
she literally said that. And so when Susan and I were discussing this, I got chills when she said
Right.
last ship to freedom. And I said, oh my God, that's the name of this book, because that is
Yes.
what it
Yeah.
literally was, the last. And then come to find out, it literally was the last one, or just about the last one, to leave the port in Sevastopol in the Crimea. And they had five ports that they were leaving from, and they were one of the last ones in
Mhm.
Sevastopol. So, it's figuratively and literally the last ship to freedom. And
So some of the stories you write about must have been for an 11, 12-year-old girl
yeah,
unbelievably traumatic. And one is the
yes,
one of the horses,
yes,
where some of the soldiers that had
yeah,
horses were rescued on the ship,
yeah,
but the horses couldn't come. It was just left
yeah.
at port, and the horses would jump in the water and start to follow the ship. And then the people on board would
Oh,
watch the horses drown. It really made me
it,
tear up because I'm such an animal lover. I cannot even imagine seeing that. And then the other one
yes,
was, and I don't know if it was George Orlov that was telling the story of, oh, makes me, the ship was now over capacity and
yes,
so many people were desperate to flee that they would
yes,
climb the ropes, and then they got the order, the sailors got the order to cut the
yes,
ropes. And
yes.
that's just heartbreaking. So
Hmm.
witnessing that must have been unbelievably traumatic.
Yes, yes. I mean, I can't imagine witnessing that now as an adult,
Mhm.
much less as an 11-year-old. I mean, that's just because that was a story I hadn't heard. That was the
Mhm.
one that I heard from Zhenya through her
Mhm.
family. And actually, just literally the other day, I was looking through some of my genealogy notebooks of my father's story, and I had written down, um, this was like years ago, I had written down something, and it was in my father's notebook, but it's about my grandmother. I wrote Lydia Frisk, and I'm going to read it because I took a screenshot of what it said. Um, and I wrote, it was just a note to myself and kind of chicken scratch here. It says, she saw the general shoot his horse and the general walking into the ocean to kill himself.
Oh my
So
gosh.
she apparently witnessed that.
Mm.
They were so distraught about losing their horses because that was like their right hand, that was their loyalty, and they
Mhm.
just, it was heartbreaking for both the
Mhm.
horse and the person. And
Yet your grandmother focused on the
yeah,
positive, on the beautiful, on the
yeah,
friendships,
right,
being with her
right,
family.
yeah,
It was to me also, the diseases on the ship,
yeah,
typhoid, and your grandmother got sick herself at
yes,
some point.
yes,
It was, man, I cannot even imagine.
no,
Then it comes to them landing in Montenegro, and my heart started to sing because I was being fortunate to visit both Novi Sad and Montenegro. We
oh my
flew into
gosh,
Tivat, we went to
yes,
Budva, and
yeah,
so we spent almost a week there,
oh,
and I was
mm,
just blown away by the
yeah,
Black Mountains, the
yes,
ocean. We were in the same resort where the last Casino Royale 007 movie was filmed.
oh no way, that's
So,
awesome. So
and
cool.
close to Sveti Stefan, and the
Oh,
treatment, the beauty of the country just blew
yeah,
me away. And I read the other day that, kind of completely unrelated, that one of the
yeah,
most undiscovered gems or biggest secret
yeah.
in Europe is Montenegro.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, my dream is to go. I was in Kotor, which is further back in the
Right.
bay there, which I
Yeah.
imagine is very similar to Herceg Novi
Right.
and to Tivat and all that. But
Right.
oh my gosh, that's like a dream of mine to go back there and to go
Yeah.
to the actual cities or
Right.
towns, villages that she was in. And she was
Yeah.
in
So when I
Tivat.
when I read, I wrote a note, and it's before I got to the last chapter where you actually went there.
Yes.
I have to ask you, did you go, or are you planning to go? And then the last chapter is you actually went there, and
Yes.
you had such a emotional
Yeah.
feeling of, this is where your grandmother
Mhm.
left the ship.
Yeah.
And you also met her
Yes.
friend's granddaughter or daughter.
No, it's actually a third cousin of
Oh,
mine
right.
on my
You had a family
father's
member.
side
Right.
who lives in
Yes.
Tivat. And I was like, are you kidding me? I was
Yeah.
expecting to be connected to this place because of my grandmother, which I did. And then I was standing in the church, the Serbian Orthodox church there, and I got a message from her saying, how long are you going to be there? I'm coming to see you, to meet you. I'd never met her before. I was like,
That's
oh
so
my, I mean, it
amazing.
was unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah.
I just feel like all the stars were aligning, or something was happening where I feel like my grandmother had a hand in. It was incredible.
Yeah. And then my husband had a job where he consulted for a company in Novi Sad, and
I
we flew there twice just
That's
for him
amazing.
to. And it was we were there for a month in 2018 and a month in 20 no 19, yes,
Oh,
18 and 19.
oh wow.
And the people, and when
Yeah.
I read your book and I read your grandmother's life there, going to school, and the captain of the ship actually came to visit, right? Or came to the
He
school.
was the General Wrangel. He was the
Yeah,
one that
that's
was
right.
stood on the front of the ship. Yes.
Right. Right. And he came to visit. It was such a big moment for her.
Yeah.
And I thought, we did this walking tour, an historical walking tour of Novi Sad, and
Mm,
I thought, my goodness, she probably lived through, like, there's still a cannon hole in one of the buildings, and
yeah.
just see the town square. And they still, by when we were there in 2018, they still had a
Mhm.
fresh fruit market where everybody would
Oh,
go every day and go buy
yeah.
the food. I loved it. 2019, they closed it. I was so
Oh
sad.
no.
But
Oh,
it was daily. The farmers would go and they, hopefully it's open by now again. But we just loved it. We
yeah.
loved the food,
Yes.
the warmth of the people our generation who couldn't really
Yeah.
speak English because of the history,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
our children's generation could all speak English. And I made
Yes.
a friend,
Oh.
Dragana. I should
Oh
tag
yeah.
her in Facebook on this.
Yes.
She, in the apartment we lived, she had a little flower shop at the
Oh.
next to the grocery store, and she had a little dog called Prile. It's like a
Aw.
wiener dog cross.
Yeah.
And because I'm such a dog lover, I speak dog fluently.
Yeah.
I would go walk by the Danube every day. So reading about the
Yes.
Danube in
Right.
your notes also.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yes, right. So I would pass the store, and the dog and I became friends. But
Aw.
Dragana couldn't speak a word of English, and so we um, started to, Google
Yeah.
Translate. And one morning at 7:30 in the morning, she just opened up. I'm just coming back from my walk. She points to a teacup. And I'm like,
Oh.
okay, that's going to be tea or Turkish
Yeah.
coffee. Yeah, I'll say
Yeah.
yes. And she handed me a cup of rakia. And if you have
Oh.
ever been in Serbia, rakia is
Yeah.
almost like moonshine. And so that
Oh.
was,
Nice. At 7:30 in the morning. Nice.
yeah. So talking to some Serbian guests, I had twice now,
Yes.
and I've learned that it's kind of to them, it wakes them up. Like, okay, I don't think
Wow. You don't need
so.
coffee, just that.
No.
Oh,
Turkish coffee
wow.
was strong enough for me, thank you.
Yeah,
But such
yeah, that's pretty
lovely
strong.
people. Yes,
Yeah.
lovely people. So it was that kind of point
Yeah.
of connection between
Yeah.
the story and myself also was
Yeah.
quite amazing.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
let
It's
me get to some more questions I have here for you.
yes.
And you wrote something that really stayed with me. You said that the more Lydia's story came alive, the more I came alive. So tell me
Hmm.
about that.
Yeah, I just feel like, I would see these people on my family tree. I knew my grandmother, but I didn't really know her. And as I read more about her, I was like, gosh, I feel like I know her better now that she's gone than I did when she was alive. And it just made me feel so full and complete. And just, feel like I was kind of inheriting her confidence and her outlook on life. And it just, it would give me chills. And just, I feel like, I don't know how to explain it really. It's just, I just felt like, instead of looking at her name on a piece of paper or looking at her handwriting on a piece of paper, I feel like it was literally coming out of the papers, her life and her story. And I felt like I was living it with her, kind of in a sense.
Mm.
It just felt so incredible.
Well, I think that's one of the other questions I have is you're right that the transformation isn't something we do alone, that sometimes we have to
Right.
look to those who come before us. And
Hmm.
how was
Yeah.
understanding Lydia's story? How has it changed the way you understand yourself?
Well, I mean, it's just that I understand why I am the way I am. And, before I would question, why am I this way? Why am I so, focused on this? Or why don't I have this confidence that, I feel like I should have, and so after 50 years of living, I go through this project and I learn about my grandmother, and all of a sudden I just feel like I have all the confidence in the world, and I just feel so strong. And so I feel like her strength and her resilience that she went through on that ship with all of those people, I feel like it's kind of transferred to me. It's inside of me. It didn't really transfer. It was always there. It was just I had to tap into it and believe it, believe in myself, believe that I could write this book and share her story, that I can do hard things. And if she went through all these crazy, difficult things to survive, certainly I can survive in whatever I'm going through in my life.
So, if there's one question that you could ask her today, what would it be?
Oh gosh, there's so many. Um, I would probably ask her, what was she thinking when she saw like these very difficult things, like when she saw the ropes being cut, like how did you how did you go on after seeing such traumatic events? Like what made you keep going and having such a positive outlook in your life? Um, because I don't know. I just feel like if I saw that, I mean, I guess you don't know how you're going to react
Mhm.
until you go through it. But I just want to know, how did she, as a young girl, how did she deal with that? What were her coping mechanisms,
Right.
basically, on how to deal with seeing traumatic things like that, like the horses, and being sick and seeing people were dying on the ship. I'm sure she witnessed that. There were people that were, the people that had died on the ship, they put them on the deck, for 5 days or something. She had to have seen that. Like, how did she deal with all of that?
Hmm. I know
That
that
I'd like
at
to
the
know.
end of the life, she moved into a retirement community, and
Yes.
at some point, I don't know if it was you or your mom who asked her, what are
Yeah.
you doing? She said, I'm reading my diaries.
Yes. Yes, that was my mother. She would call her every day on her way home from work, and she'd call her mother and she would say, "Oh, one day she said, 'Oh, I'm reading my diaries.'" And you would think that that would be a great segue into saying, "Oh, giving some questions." But for whatever reason, I think my mother was busy with life. I was busy with college, with whatever. And, you're in the here and now and you don't think about these things. But that was probably the last time, they talked about it, and they didn't really talk about it. And what's funny is, as my mother was translating and looking through the diaries, you could see that she crossed out some words that she misspelled and she would correct them. And whether she did that when she was younger or, I think some of it she might have done maybe at that point when my mother called her from on the way home from work asking what she was doing. She probably corrected it then too. So,
Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, that must have
yeah,
had such deep meaning to her. So I want to
yeah,
ask you a question about genealogy, but I want to go a little bit deeper than
yeah,
genealogy. If Lydia had never written those diaries, so much of her inner world would have been
yeah,
lost forever.
yeah.
What do you think is lost? Not historically, but emotionally when families stop telling their stories.
You don't know yourself. You don't, if you don't know what happened to your family, you just have this image in your head of who they were and what they were like, but you don't really know. Like I feel like my life would be so empty now if I didn't read these diaries. Like I can't imagine not knowing all this information now, and if I didn't care enough to look into it. I mean, those diaries could still be sitting in a bin in my mother's house,
Yeah.
and it's, I feel like I wouldn't be as confident as I am today. I wouldn't be as strong as I am today. I feel
Mhm.
like I wouldn't be the person I am today. I am the person I am today because of what she went through, but I wouldn't have known that had I not done this project and done
Mhm.
the research of, and I didn't just do the research. I delved into it full force and wanted to know
Yes, you
every
did.
single detail.
You did. Yeah,
So,
for those of you who are going to read this book, and I really highly recommend that you do, Tamara did an insane amount of research, and at the end of each chapter are pages and pages full of citations, and it's just amazing to read that and to see the detail.
yeah.
It's not, we get so much guessing games these days of
Hmm.
interpretations instead of facts. And I think this
Right.
book is totally based on facts. And it was really good for me to see that
Yeah.
every single thing that your grandmother wrote about, you went and researched
Hmm.
historically and could verify
Yeah.
it. And it was not just, I think this is what she means,
Yeah.
this is what happened. So I
Yes.
really admire that. I think you did a
Yeah.
brilliant job.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
So another question was, the book is called The Last Ship to Freedom.
Hmm.
What do you think freedom meant to Lydia?
Freedom, I think, to Lydia meant free, from political and physical constraints. I think maybe at that time, maybe she didn't really understand it, but I know to her parents, for sure, they wanted to have just physical freedom, political freedom. They wanted to be
Mhm.
able, they didn't want to be restricted in what they could do. They didn't want to fear for their life. They were afraid. Um, so I think that's what freedom meant to her. Just and she never looked back when she was in the United States. She still was connected with her cousins back in Odessa,
That's
and
right. Yes.
she never looked back once. And I said, this is here's another question I would ask her, um, because I wasn't able to ask her while she was still alive. After reading all these letters that were back and forth between her and her cousins, I want to know, did she feel bad that she left and, had such a better life than her cousins did back in Russia? Just, I don't, it just like I felt this my heart was pulling for them in Odessa, and it's just so sad that they had such a terrible, you know, life, and or I should say not terrible, but a very difficult and challenging life over there compared to my grandmother. And my mother always said that my grandmother never looked back. She said this was the best decision ever, and she said my mother said that a lot of times my grandmother would just say, "Well, that's just the way it is," and I think that was kind of her answer to everything. Like, how did and I think that's how she would answer the questions that I would ask her. Like, how did you deal with seeing all these traumatic events while you were living on the ship? And I think her answer would be, it's just how it is. That's how
Hmm.
it happened.
Hmm.
That's how it is, and not really question why or why me or anything like that. It was just, that's just how it is, and you have to move on.
So
So,
you mentioned earlier that, I mean, all came at a crossroads in your life.
yeah,
And I think women our age, we pretty much the same age,
yeah,
is it's really, you get to that point where you start to
yeah,
question, why am I here?
right.
And I think that's very normal. I've seen this hundreds of times with clients where you start to wonder what your purpose is.
Yes.
So, how did this change you?
Well, it kind of answered, what is my purpose here? Because I was asking all those same questions. Basically, like, what have I done? What am I doing here? What is my purpose in life? And, this kind of clarified that, I think my purpose here is to tell the stories of my ancestors, and just get a better understanding of myself and my world, I guess, too. And I feel like anybody that's struggling with who they are and having these questions, I think researching your past and what your ancestors went through really is a strengthening and whether it's good or bad. I mean, a lot of ancestors obviously have gone through, I mean, everybody goes through terrible times, challenging times, and to
Mm,
see that they got through it okay, that's very confirming and very reassuring.
mm. What is next for you?
So am going to, I've gone back and forth between several different ideas, but I'm definitely writing another book. I'm getting my mother's story down because I can still ask her questions because that's a lesson that I learned. So, and I'm hoping to get a little genealogy business going on, consulting with people, trying to help them retrieve the stories from their family
Mm,
trees,
mm,
like not just look at names and dates and research, the facts, really getting down to getting the story because I think it's the stories that really matter a lot.
right, right. After landing in the US, there's nothing more. Did she ever write anything about that?
Oh, yeah. So she wrote until 1924. She arrived in the United States in 19, June 5th of 1922. And I believe her last entry was September 1st, 1924. Not sure why she stopped then, but she lived in New York City. And my focus on this book was her leaving and fleeing
Right, the
Russia, the
journey.
Russian
Yeah.
Empire, the journey, and everything. And, it was still interesting to read her story. Maybe I'll do a second part of her of her story as well. I have so many projects in my mind that I want to do.
Hmm, hmm.
So I'll probably will write a narrative of that at some point. But what sticks out for me the most was that she would have piano lessons, and she would practice like 5 hours a day or something crazy like that. And she would walk to her, at 12 years old, she in New York City, she would walk to her piano teacher's house for her lesson, and the teacher would say that she didn't practice enough, that she needs to be better. And it's like I can see where this, I have a little perfectionistic
Mm,
issue
mm,
going on. So I'm like, that probably comes from that as well. And she loved New York City. But it was amazing to me to learn that at 12 years old, she's walking around the city all by herself, trying to figure out, because her parents, I don't think, knew English very well, if at all. Her father worked in a restaurant and somewhere in New York City. I have the addresses somewhere, but and as her diaries, as she kept writing in 1923 and 24, she added more English words into it. And
interesting. Yeah. Mm,
yeah. So yeah, and her handwriting changed a little bit. It was, and you can see here's one of the diaries right here.
amazing.
And you can see this is her handwriting here.
Yeah.
So, and you don't need to know Russian to know that that's very neat. That was at 11 years old. So her handwriting was
Mm,
just
very
impeccable.
beautiful.
It was
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
Her penmanship was very important to her. But yeah, it was interesting to see her views on things as she got older as well. And now, like I said, I'm reading her letters, which is basically a diary because she
Yeah.
wrote my mother like 2 or 3 times a week in 1963 and 64. My mother wrote back, just as many times. And, I
Right.
can just hear her voice in my head saying these things and that she's writing. And it's just, I feel like she's in the room with me, you
It's
know?
so amazing. So amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question that I ask all my guests because my podcast is To Freedom.
Yes.
So, my final question for you today, Tamara, is you once wrote that you were seeking freedom from being, in quotations, only the roles you
Yeah.
fulfilled for everyone else. Today, after walking beside Lydia and feeling her with you for so many years, what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom means to me the ability to follow my passions with no restrictions, not caring what other people think about what I'm doing. I'm just following what my heart tells me, and um, I just I feel free. I feel very free of any, little chatter in my head that might have said, you're not good enough, or
Love it.
you can't write a book. You've never written a book before. How, that kind of stuff. And I feel like, and initially when I think of freedom, it's, I think of travel too, like wanting to go places and learn about places and just be free to go where I want and
Yeah.
just, you know, search for new experiences and to, better my life.
Yeah. It's interesting because I always say that freedom doesn't mean the same for two people.
Right.
And
No, it
for
doesn't.
Lydia, freedom may have meant escaping the Russian
Hmm.
Revolution, ending up
Right.
in Montenegro, Serbia, and then
Yeah.
finally the US.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
said that definitely for her parents.
Right.
And for you, freedom
Yeah.
is something deeper inside. And maybe it
Yeah.
was for her as well, because she
Yeah.
could stay positive. But for
Right.
you,
Right.
it is quieting those voices in your head that you cannot do it and
Right.
conquering it. So I think that's
Right.
amazing.
Right. And I would not have this freedom today, this feeling, if it weren't for what my ancestors went through, because she wasn't the only immigrant in my family. My father was also an immigrant, and so they were also fleeing.
Mhm.
So for their sacrifices, I have my freedom today, physically, politically, emotionally. It's an incredible feeling, and I'm so grateful for my ancestors for going through all that so that their legacy, their children, and their children's children's children can be free.
Tamara, where can people get hold of you? Where can they buy your book?
My book is available anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Also, I have a website, tamarabuzyna-adams.org or .com, sorry. Also, I'm on Instagram on author Tamara Adams, also on Facebook, Tamara Buzyna-Adams. I'm also on LinkedIn as well, Tamara Buzyna-Adams. Um, I kept my maiden name in there so that I can differentiate between the other Tamara Adams.
That's
So
beautiful. Well, it was lovely talking to you, lovely to get a lot of the story behind your beautiful book. And
thank you.
I feel so blessed that you were with us today, Tamara, talking to us about Lydia, about yourself, and about the journey to freedom.
Yes, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And for everybody watching, thank you for being here. And I will put Tamara's links in the description of this podcast. So have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you next time about more freedom. Thank you so much to Tamara Buzyna-Adams for sharing not only the remarkable story behind Last Ship to Freedom, but also her own journey of uncovering family history, purpose, and identity. If you'd like to learn more about Tamara or purchase her book, you'll find all of her links in the description of this episode. And thank you for joining me for this episode of To Freedom. If you enjoyed our conversation, please follow the podcast, subscribe wherever you're watching or listening, and share this episode with someone who would enjoy it. Every share helps these meaningful conversations reach more people. Until next time, keep choosing freedom.